7. Swiss bunkers. Switzerland is well known for its hands-off approach when it comes to other countries' wars. In fact, the nation has not directly engaged in any international conflicts in over 150 years, and it even became the go-to location for those looking to escape war throughout Europe. Yet for a country that seems to resist violent confrontations with others, Switzerland is fairly well fortified. During World War II, the Swiss government maintained its neutral stance, but the country's leadership also decided it was better to be safe than sorry and built tens of thousands of bunkers. Some were meant for keeping civilians safe, should the need arise, while others were specifically designed for military use. The bunker's existence is no secret, but most of them are shrouded in mystery. During the 1990s, the government opened many of them up to the public. But the Swiss military disagreed with this decision and refused to cooperate, making it difficult for people to visit the facilities. Information about the shelters is even hard to find on the internet, and official records are the same. The bunkers are found all over Switzerland and vary in appearance. Today, most of these shelters are hidden in plain sight. Many are disguised as houses, cabins, barns, and other ordinary structures. Others are even less noticeable and are built underground and directly into hills and mountains. Their entrances are marked only by a door that's designed to blend in with its surroundings as seamlessly as possible. In 2017, photographer Rito Sturci managed to get into a few of the bunkers that are privately owned. Some owners have repurposed them as hotels, restaurants, museums, or their own personal spaces. Others have left them untouched, serving as a sort of time capsule. Sturci captured snapshots featuring decontamination chambers, communal showers, dormitories, and even dining tables that seem set for a meal. 6. Tashkent Metro. Until recent years, photos of Central Asia's largest subway system were mysteriously missing from the internet. This was thanks to a government ban on photographing the Tashkent Metro in Uzbekistan. The ban was lifted back in 2018, giving most of the world their first ever opportunity to take a peek at the breathtaking underground stations. During the Soviet era, Tashkent city planners agreed to build a subway system when the population got up to 1 million. The milestone was achieved in the early 1960s, and construction officially started in 1971. 6 years later, the subway opened up to the public for the first time. The Tashkent Metro is visibly dated, but in many ways, it puts iconic subway systems to shame. Its stations showcase elegant 16-foot chandeliers, stunning artwork, and breathtaking mosque-like architecture. And at only 15 cents per entry, it's cheaper to ride than almost any other subway in the world. So why was this historic marvel kept out of sight for so long? Well, in addition to being built as a transportation system, the tunnels and station were meant to be an emergency shelter for civilians, should the need arise. Stations were outfitted with heavy blast doors, while their ground-level entrances were marked inconspicuously and designed to blend in with the landscapes. Photography was banned for national security reasons, but in 2018, leaders decided the threat of nuclear warfare was no longer imminent, and the ban was finally lifted. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Uzbek government decommunized many of the stations, with much of the symbolism and artwork representing the former ruling power removed. Some of it was replaced with Uzbek artwork, while other Soviet relics stay in place to this day. Uzbekistan has held up neutrality since 2012. During the ongoing fighting in Ukraine, President Shavkat Mirziyoyev has stuck by the policy. In mid-2023, he called for peace in Ukraine and said that he planned to stick to Western sanctions while maintaining the country's ties with Moscow as usual. 5. Sweden's bunkers. Under Sweden's largest cities and towns, there are well over 65,000 underground bunkers that were built to hold people in the event of an attack. They have enough room to house about 70% of the country's population of 10.4 million. The shelters started construction in the 1940s, but most were built during the 1950s and 60s during the Cold War nuclear scare. Many are in places that currently serve other functions, including commercial buildings, apartment complexes, garages, subway stations, and more. They're reportedly equipped to protect occupants from all kinds of weapons. People aren't assigned to specific bunkers. In the event of an emergency, everyone is encouraged to simply go to the one closest to them. If the alarm were to go off, the owners of the buildings that house shelters would have 48 hours to empty them all of irrelevant items. The bunkers are equipped with water, heating, ventilation, and plumbing. If the Swedish people ever need to make use of them, they'll be expected to bring their own bottled water, non-perishable foods, hygiene products, medicine, and other basic everyday necessities. For the sake of being prepared, Swedish citizens can easily look up their nearest bunker online if they'd like. The country also tests its public emergency alarm system, Horse Fredrik, 4 times every year, infiltrating its populated areas with painfully loud honking sounds. Sweden has maintained neutrality since the 19th century, but there's never a guarantee of avoiding violence, and the government prioritizes protecting its citizens above everything else. Construction on the bunkers concluded in 2002 when the country's leaders decided there was no longer a major need for them. Their views have changed in recent years, though, and in 2017, Sweden's Defense Commission recommended building more bunkers and updating the existing ones, many of which had not been inspected in over a decade. As a truly neutral country, Sweden avoided joining NATO for quite some time. In 2022, the nation formally submitted its application to join, and its membership is now pending. Do you know where the nearest shelter to you is in case of an emergency? It'd probably be a good idea to find out. If you're enjoying today's video so far, be sure to subscribe to the channel to see more. 4. Helsinki's bunkers. Under the busy streets of Finland's capital, Helsinki, there's a sprawling network of underground bunkers that are equipped to protect the city's 630,000 civilians in case of an attack. Built directly into the bedrock back in the 1960s, the shelters are connected by over 200 miles of tunnels. Most of the bunkers are blast-proof, gas-proof, and capable of shielding people from both radiation and toxic chemicals. They're most commonly used for parking and storage, though. Unlike dank, dimly lit Cold War-era shelters, many of Helsinki's bunkers are well-lit, clean, and warm. They have enough room to hold the city's entire population, along with several 100,000 more, which means that there's enough room for any tourists and other possible visitors at any given time. Situated 60 feet underground, one of these bunkers is home to a parking lot, a soccer field, a playground, and even a cafeteria. It has enough room for 6,000 people. Other shelters have cafes, go-kart tracks, softball courts, archery ranges, and more. They're also outfitted with the things people would need to survive for prolonged periods, including thousands of bunk beds. To maintain order, several items are banned inside these spaces, like alcohol, drugs, weapons, heat-producing devices, and anything that smells too much. For decades, Finland stuck to a policy of military neutrality. But even neutral countries need to protect themselves if the need arises. In April 2023, the country officially became a member of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO. President Sauli Niinisto said that while he does not believe that there are any imminent threats to Finland, it's become a priority to maximize national security during Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Finland shares an 830-mile border with Russia and has been invaded by its neighbor in the past, so they'd prefer to be prepared if their relationship sours. The country's need to step up its national security became especially clear when its bid to join NATO angered Russia. Kremlin officials have accused the alliance of trying to encircle its borders, and Putin has promised to move Russia's nuclear weapons closer to Europe and to take other retaliatory steps if this kind of behavior continues. 3. Moldova's bunkers. The Moldovan Soviet Socialist Republic, or Moldova, is home to a handful of abandoned Cold War bunkers, including a 13-story underground command center in the Soldenesti district. Located a few hours outside the capital city of Chisinau, this cylindrical structure sits hidden under the trees in a remote, densely wooded area in the northwestern region of the country. Dubbed Object 1180, it was built at the end of the Cold War starting in 1984, when Moldova was still under Soviet control. Locals knew something was going on, and they were aware of the Red Army's presence in the area, but they were banned from going down the dirt road that led to the mysterious construction site and were told nothing about it. According to records, as many as 1,500 Red Army soldiers guarded the base. At the height of its existence, the property contained 2 administrative blocks and 1 residential block, the remnants of which are mostly gone today. The bunker at Soldanesti was one of the largest Soviet shelters ever constructed. It was 32 times more expensive to build than a typical Soviet high-rise apartment building and was equipped to support a population the size of a small town. Moldova was under Soviet rule until 1991, when the country declared its independence during the fall of the Iron Curtain. The bunker was 95% finished being built when it was abandoned later that year. Today, much of the structure is flooded, overgrown with rogue plants, and covered in rust. For now, the site attracts brave urban explorers, but it seems as if a company has been working to scrap it in recent years. Under Moldova's current constitution, the country must either stay neutral or mobilize its military. The country also does not allow the deployment of foreign forces on its soil. This has been a policy since 1994, but many are starting to wonder how long this can last, since Moldova is directly south of Ukraine. 2. Austria's bunkers. In December 2014, a documentary team led by an Austrian filmmaker named Andreas Sulzer discovered a sprawling Nazi bunker in the woods of northern Austria near the city of Linz. They discovered the site's concealed entrance using intelligence reports, ground-penetrating radar, and radiation tests, which helped hint at the bunker's purpose. Given the abnormally high radiation levels the team detected, among other clues, they concluded that they had most likely found the bunker where Nazis developed nuclear weapons. The team described the 75-acre former industrial complex as likely the biggest secret weapons production facility of the Third Reich. An American intelligence report from the period it operated during supports the crew's suspicions about the true nature of the facility. According to news reports, the bunker was built using forced labor, with as many as 320,000 prisoners dying during the construction. The sprawling complex was near, and may have been connected to, the underground Bergkristall factory, where the Nazis developed the first-ever jet-powered fighter plane, the Messerschmitt Me 262. After the war, the Allies inspected the Bergkristall site, but they never located the nuclear experimentation site. Shortly after the bunker's discovery, police stopped an excavation attempt because the team lacked the necessary permit to dig. It's unclear whether the project continued or if the bunker's identity was fully confirmed. Other World War II bunkers have been discovered throughout the country, including a massive underground command center called the Schirach Bunker. Just like the nuclear experimentation site, authorities shot down a proposal to excavate the facility, suggesting that the country would like to move on from its dark period in its history. In 1955, Austria declared permanent neutrality and made the policy part of its constitution. This was done partially to satisfy the Allies after World War II for the sake of the country obtaining independence. Since then, neutrality has become an integral part of Austria's identity. So much so that 2 Austrian politicians walked out on a speech being given by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in early 2023 because they felt it violated their neutrality agreements. 1. Belgrade's bunker network. During the 1950s and 60s, the Yugoslavian dictator Josip Broz Tito oversaw the construction of a secret network of underground tunnels and bunkers in the Serbian capital of Belgrade. The complex was built into a hill and is among the hundreds of tunnels, caves, cellars, bunkers, and passageways that sit beneath the city. Many of these structures have yet to be unsealed, and according to archaeologists, it could take decades to fully explore them all. The bunker's existence was kept secret from the public up until 2004, when 2 soldiers were fatally shot while guarding a hillside entrance into one of the sites. Their deaths remained shrouded in mystery, even while an investigation revealed the bunker's presence. In 2016, a World War II-era German bunker was found at a supermarket construction site in Belgrade's Vidikovac district. According to a worker there, the structure was at least 3 stories. It was one of 3 World War II bunkers that have been discovered in Belgrade. At a time when several countries who resisted NATO membership have officially submitted their applications, Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić announced in early 2023 that the country would uphold its military neutrality. The policy has been in place since 2007, and while there are no plans to break away from the status quo, Serbia maintains good relations with NATO and is in the hoping to join the European Union. 10. Punji Sticks. When America entered the Vietnam War, most of its soldiers weren't familiar with the concept of guerrilla warfare. More specifically, their definition of what it meant to win or lose a battle, and the methods for taking out enemies were vastly different from those of the Viet Cong. While the American mindset meant that a winner was the last one standing on the battlefield when all was said and done, the VC had no problem retreating from an active battle. In fact, it was an imperative part of their tactics for drawing U.S. soldiers further into their territory and ambushing them. To aid in this strategy, they implemented an array of booby traps that were rigged to go off when activated by unsuspecting passerby, aiding the VC's efforts even in their absence. It's estimated that as many as 11% of deaths and 15% of wounds to U.S. soldiers in Vietnam were caused by booby traps and landmines. As much as 2% of the wounds suffered by American soldiers during the Vietnam War were caused by sharpened rods called punji sticks, or stakes, typically made from bamboo and sometimes from metal. The simple yet ingenious devices were often planted in camouflaged pits by the Viet Cong, with the hopes that American troops would pass through and walk over them. For added effect, the North Vietnamese sometimes smeared the tips of the sticks with feces or plant poison. Unsuspecting soldiers stepped right into the holes, which were concealed by leaves and foliage, and were impaled by the rods. Punji sticks weren't meant to kill, but to cause excruciating pain and slow down advancing units as they stopped to tend to wounded soldiers. In most cases, the sticks penetrated the lower leg area. They were positioned in a way that typically made it impossible for an injured soldier to pull his leg away without causing further injury. And the concealed pits were often positioned side by side so that any soldiers who ran to the first injured troop's aid also fell and got hurt. Not only were the punji sticks being placed in pits, they were put in tunnels and used with barbed wire. They were also often strategically placed in areas where the Viet Cong expected American forces to take cover during an ambush as a way to weaken their defense. 9. Hand grenade booby traps. The Viet Cong were masters when it came to booby traps, using a creative variety of materials and techniques to trip up the enemy. One of their most highly favored, tried-and-true methods of ensnaring American soldiers was through the use of strategically placed hand grenades. Oftentimes, the explosives were hidden along streams and at the bases of tunnels, with a string attaching them to a stake in the ground. All it took to trigger an explosion was an unsuspecting person to get caught on the tripwire. The Viet Cong also rigged pathways that were used by American soldiers by removing the safety pins from grenades and stuffing them inside cans, which kept the safety activated. They tied the bomb to a string and placed the explosives in a manner that pulled them out of the cans when someone stepped on the string, causing the safety to deactivate and the grenade to explode. The VC had other imaginative ways of hiding active grenades. When they gave up their position, they sometimes rigged their flag with an explosive, knowing that the Americans took great satisfaction in capturing enemy flags. You can probably guess what happened when U.S. troops went to take the flag down. In these cases, the VC often set secondary booby traps and secondary delayed charges, so that anyone who rushed in to help the soldiers who were wounded in the first explosion would also get hurt. 8. Cartridge trap. The Viet Cong favored cartridge traps because they were extremely difficult for Americans to detect, and they only required 4 basic parts that were easy to acquire: a bamboo tube, a piece of wood, a nail, and a small arms cartridge. They were also easy to assemble. The bamboo pipe was positioned upright and nailed in place on a wooden foundation. A nail that functioned as a firing pin was placed beneath the ammunition cartridge, and the trap was buried with the ammo round facing up. When someone stepped on it, the primer on the cartridge pressed down on the nail, causing the round to fire straight into the person's foot. Cartridge traps were typically non-fatal, but they caused severe injuries. And by aiming for the foot, the VC did a good job not only at pulling individual soldiers out of the game, but distracting entire sections of soldiers who would rush over to tend to the injured individual. For the VC, it created the perfect ambush opportunity. 7. Bamboo whip. In keeping with their impressive ability to come up with simple yet highly effective ways to sabotage the enemy, the Viet Cong made use of materials that were readily available. One of their most ingenious creations was the bamboo whip, or the whip trap. It involved setting a 3 to 10 foot long stalk of green bamboo with spikes attached to one end in an arched position against a tree with a catch device attached to a tripwire. The wire was laid across a path that the VC expected American soldiers to pass through. When activated, the catch released the spike-covered bamboo stalk, which in turn impaled the person who stepped on the tripwire. According to We Are the Mighty, bamboo whips could travel as fast as 100 miles per hour, giving the person in its path nowhere near enough time to get out of its way. It typically struck in the legs or torso, and it was definitely enough to put a soldier out of commission at the very least. Do you think you'd be able to avoid this during the war? Let me know in the comments, and hit subscribe while you're at it. 6. Faulty ammunition. The M16 is historically known for being an unreliable gun that's prone to jamming and a host of other malfunctions. But it became the standard issue gun for the US troops during the Vietnam War. Instead of focusing on improving it, however, the Americans were more concerned with sabotaging the enemy's Chinese-made AK-47 supply. In a covert campaign codenamed Project Eldest Son, Americans stole ammunition stashes from various hiding places throughout the wilderness. Technicians replaced the smokeless powder in the cartridge with a similar-looking but highly explosive substance that generated an enormous amount of pressure and caused the gun to explode upon firing. Troops replanted the deadly ammo in known stash pots throughout Laos, Vietnam, and Cambodia, with the intention that unsuspecting enemy soldiers would use it and unknowingly blow themselves up. To disguise the cause of the impending blasts, the saboteurs mixed the rigged ammo with cartridges that had not been tampered with. A clandestine group of Green Berets, called the Studies and Observations Group, or SOG, were tasked with leaving the faulty supply with known guerrilla ammunition stashes. In some cases, operatives created new stashes in places where they predicted the ammunition might come in handy for the Viet Cong, and where it would make sense to think that a previous VC unit had left the stash, rather than enemy American forces. In most cases, the rifle components were projected backwards toward the shooter. Saboteurs also placed substitute fuses in the mortar shells. The results of firing an AK-47 with sabotaged ammo were typically catastrophic for the soldier who was unlucky enough to pull the trigger, and anyone nearby. Guns are unavoidably dangerous, but most people don't expect to pull the trigger and have the weapon blow up in their face. The main goal of Project Eldest Son was to make the enemy question the safety and reliability of their ordnance. To encourage this line of thinking, American operatives forged documents to spark mistrust between the gun manufacturers and the troops using the weapons. In some ways, the mission was very successful, but it was discovered before even half of the rigged ammunition had been placed, sparking a rushed effort to distribute the rest before the Vietnamese discovered the true reason their guns were malfunctioning. Even after they learned about the operation, it had the damaging effect of compromising the safety of their ammunition stashes in combat areas where the materials were most needed. 5. Mace trap. One of the most commonly used and destructive devices used by the Viet Cong to sabotage the American adversaries was the mace trap, or the swinging mace. In simple terms, it involved suspending a 24-inch metal, concrete, or wooden ball, often weighing 40 pounds or more, and with spikes welded onto it in a tree. Like most of the other traps you'll hear about on today's list, it was attached to a tripwire. The unfortunate soul who tripped the wire would cause the ball to be released from its waiting position and right into their path, often striking in the head and torso. The swinging pendulum was known for its deadly capabilities, and some even considered it the worst of all the booby traps that were used during the Vietnam War. It often struck more than just one soldier, creating a two birds with one stone effect. 4. Tiger trap. Like the mace trap, the tiger trap relied mostly on gravity to do its damage. Also known as a deadfall, it consisted of a large, spiked wooden board that was situated overhead and connected to a tripwire. The board was also weighted with bricks. When someone stepped on the wire, the board was released and simply fell on the soldier, often causing major injuries to their head and upper body. Because of its weight, the deadly piece fell hard and fast. ensuring that its target had little time to think before they were hit. And it most certainly was capable of killing whoever was in its path. 3. Venomous snake traps. Included among the many sabotage methods the Viet Cong had up their sleeves was the use of pit vipers and highly venomous snakes. They carried the reptiles in their packs so that any Americans or other enemies who might search their belongings would risk being bitten. VC guerrilla fighters also tied snakes to bamboo tripwires and hid them throughout the tunnels, in hopes that the reptiles would bite American tunnel rats who ventured into the dark, narrow labyrinths. They called pit vipers three-step snakes, as a reference to the limited number of steps an American soldier would be able to take before being killed by the venom. Tunnel rats were specifically trained to identify and disarm these traps, but it didn't make the job any less dangerous. Earlier on in the war, the US Army struggled to come up with a way to destroy Viet Cong tunnel systems. Bombing was ineffective, and many of the tunnel networks were so large that efforts to smoke guerrilla fighters out or drive them out with tear gas often failed. At some point, the military realized that the only way to impose on the tunnels was to send soldiers inside of them. Entering the tunnels came with many dangers in addition to the possibility of encountering a booby trap. Poorly constructed tunnels sometimes collapsed, and the Viet Cong purposely built them so they were easy to flood, in case the need to drown a tunnel rat arose. In some cases, VC fighters attacked tunnel rats with poison gas. The subterranean pathways were also filled with dangerous creatures other than pit vipers, including disease-carrying rats, venomous scorpions, and ants. Due to the unavoidable dangers that came along with the job, tunnel rats suffered shockingly high casualty rates compared to many other units. In addition to the hazards of entering the tunnels, just being on the ground was dangerous for tunnel rats, due to the US military's use of Agent Orange and other dangerous chemicals. As a result, a high percentage of tunnel rats who survived the war have suffered from lifelong health complications due to Agent Orange exposure. 2. Hornet trap. Hornet traps have been described as similar to, but less aggressive than snake traps. Given its self-explanatory name, not much of an explanation is needed. The Viet Cong set these traps by placing bee or hornet nests along a patrol route. They made especially clever use of Asian giant honeybees, which entomologists have described as the most ferocious stinging insect on Earth. The hive was linked to a small charge when someone unknowingly walked by and activated the trap. As you probably already know, it doesn't take much to anger a hive full of bees or hornets. In this case, the small charge took care of that part, releasing a plethora of hostile insects on entire groups of soldiers. On the American end of things, the US sponsored a program to create an apparatus that would spray VC guerrillas with the pheromone that attracts bee stings. As innovative as the concept was, it was never put to use. 1. Anti-helicopter booby traps. The use of helicopters was imperative to the American war effort in Vietnam. In addition to ferrying supplies to US military sites, choppers deposited troops into battle and evacuated injured soldiers away from the battle scene. Consequently, the Viet Cong devised ways to disable landing helicopters. One simple but highly effective method involved attaching mounting grenades, mortar rounds, and other explosive to trees surrounding a landing zone. Naturally, the devices were attached to tripwires, which were strung between poles that were inserted into the ground. The tripwires were activated by the landing aircraft, effectively grounding the helicopter. According to a Marine Corps report, the VC once tasked a teenage boy with positioning hand grenades at various chopper landing zones. He tied pieces of paper to strings that were wrapped around the grenade's levers. When a helicopter's rotor blades blew the paper, it pulled on the strings and triggered the grenades to explode. 8. The Ghost Army. In January 1944, toward the tail end of World War II, the United States Army established its first-ever tactical deception unit. Nicknamed the Ghost Army, it was officially called the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops. The top-secret unit consisted of 82 officers and 1,023 soldiers, who spent the final year of the war tricking the Germans into believing they were a 30,000-strong force. They accomplished this using a variety of highly convincing visual, sonic, and radio deception tactics. Armed with only .50 caliber machine guns, these clever combat con artists carried out 22 large-scale deceptions against the Nazis. Due to the sophisticated nature of their missions, most of the Ghost Army's members had backgrounds in art or engineering, or were highly trained professional soldiers with advanced skills. With an average IQ of 119, they were one of the most intelligent military groups of all time. The Ghost Army's tactics included using inflatable tanks, jeeps, trucks, aircraft, and other vehicles that looked real, fake radio traffic and sound effects, and deploying bogus generals who passed as legit military officials. These methods worked incredibly well, effectively saving thousands of lives while driving the Germans crazy with false leads. Their work was highly classified. Even after the war ended, members of the Ghost Army were sworn to secrecy, and for decades, the military went to great lengths to conceal any sign of the unit. Its existence was finally revealed to the public in 1985, courtesy of a Smithsonian Magazine expose, and the matter was officially declassified during the 90s. When the Ghost Army's existence was finally no longer a secret, former members became more comfortable with the idea of openly discussing their service. During an interview with Princeton Alumni Weekly's Rick Bayer, U.S. military veteran Freddie Fox described the Ghost Army as a traveling roadshow that went up and down the front lines impersonating the real fighting outfits. But to understand how the clandestine unit came to be, first we have to rewind a little. 7. Operation Cascade. The Ghost Army's creation was at least partially inspired by the British military's use of deception in North Africa during an Allied mission codenamed Operation Cascade. It took place in 1942, at a time when British forces in the region were weak. To prevent an attack by the Axis powers, they had to rely on something other than actual members or force. By then, the British had already become seasoned at the art of deception. In 1941, the year before Operation Cascade commenced, an elite group called the Advanced Headquarters A-Force created 3 bogus units in the Mediterranean theater. Known as the 1st SAS Brigade, the 10th Armored Division, and the 7th Division, these phony regiments were designed to make the British presence in the Mediterranean seem bigger than it was. And the plan worked out well, which was why the Allies decided to try it again in North Africa when it became clear that they were actually at a disadvantage in the region. The purpose of Operation Cascade was to further increase the Allies' strength by building both their false and real presence. To create more bogus units, soldiers were sent to North Africa from their bases in the United Kingdom, Australia, New Zealand, India, and South Africa. It was important for these fake groups to seem real, so the campaign's planners drew up crests, orders of battle, and all the other things that a person would expect to observe in a real unit. They broadcasted false radio traffic for enemy intelligence and civilian informants to pick up on. And it effectively gave off the impression that there were a lot more troops in the region than there actually were. The A-Force also had many of the civilian informants in their pocket as double agents who passed enemy information their way. Operation Cascade was deemed a sweeping success based on captured enemy documents, which showed that the Axis powers truly believed there was a large Allied presence in North Africa. An in-depth A-Team analysis that was concluded shortly after the campaign also concluded that it was successful, so it made perfect sense for the Americans to borrow some of these techniques when it came time to establish the Ghost Army. 6. Visual deception. In addition to the tactics used during Operation Cascade, the Allies utilized visual deception to fool the Axis powers during the Mediterranean and North African campaigns. These strategies came in handy long before the United States even joined the war. A few months after declaring war in 1940, Italy, an Axis power, invaded Egypt from Libya, opening up a new battlefront in the deserts of North Africa. In addition to the terrain and climate being difficult, there were few places to hide. This new landscape presented the Allies with a lot of challenges that they weren't used to dealing with. But showing weakness or vulnerability was not an option, so instead, they came up with clever ways to make themselves look more numerous, and therefore more powerful than they actually were. In other words, they decided to hide in plain sight. They did so through the clever use of camouflage and disguise. In 1941, British filmmaker Geoffrey Barkis was appointed the director of camouflage at the general headquarters in Cairo. He was in command of specially trained engineers, officers, and other personnel, including artists, zoologists, and theater and film specialists. In one of their most brag-worthy feats, the deceptive unit disguised a water purification building to look heavily damaged in the wake of battles against the Germans, when there was really nothing wrong with it. As their strategies proved successful, the group expanded on its methods. They created phantom armies using dummy tanks, equipment, and soldiers, and they even installed fake railroads and pipelines. The unit also disguised trucks as tanks, and vice versa, through the use of wooden or canvas covers called sun shields. And as you're about to learn, the American Ghost Army borrowed more than a few pages out of the British A-Team's handbook when they decided to form their own deceptive regiment. 5. D-Day Operation Fortitude. Of the more than 20 operations carried out by the Ghost Army, their arguably most notable work took place during the Allied invasion of Normandy on June 6, 1944, also famously known as D-Day. Most members of the Ghost Army arrived in England in May in anticipation of the upcoming Normandy landings. Their main task was to distract the Germans by drawing attention away from Normandy. It would be a tricky endeavor, since the Nazis had long been anticipating a cross-channel invasion, and were therefore keeping a watchful eye on the area. Codenamed Operation Fortitude, the plot involved using fake tanks, ships, aircraft, and even dummy soldiers to make the Germans believe that the Allies were invading beaches that are located roughly 100 miles, or 160 kilometers, north of Normandy. The plan was carried out in several phases, or layers, by two phantom armies, one stationed in southeast England toward Calais, and the other in Scotland, under the guise that it was potentially headed toward Norway. Led by none other than the famed American Lieutenant General George S. Patton, the Phantom Army that was stationed in England seemed incredibly real by virtue of its leader alone. The decision to have Patton lead the bogus unit was an ingenious one, and it only added to the believability of all the props and other deceptive techniques that the Ghost Army employed to make an invasion of Calais seem realistic. A team of specialists staged the Phantom Army, dummy vehicles, and fake weapons at Dover, the closest point in England to Calais, and waited for the Germans to notice its presence, with some help from double agents who leaked false information to the Nazis to encourage them to check the situation out. In addition to the fake props and phony tips, the Allies purposely fled 2 missions over Calais for every single mission over Normandy to make it seem as though Calais was a bigger priority. And as the saying goes, the rest is history. Operation Fortitude was a sweeping success, along with D-Day, which helped further solidify the Allied path to victory in the war. 4. Previous uses of deception: camouflage trees. As impressive as the Ghost Army and the British military were for their accomplishments during World War II, deception has a long-held place in warfare. During World War I, the French, British, and Germans placed fake trees in the forest along their front lines. They were first used in 1915 by the French, who soon passed the idea along to the British. The Germans adopted the concept shortly thereafter. In many cases, the fake trees were replicas of real trees near the front line that had been damaged during battle. Engineers photographed and measured the destroyed tree, which was then recreated by artists using wrinkled and painted iron as bark, along with textured materials such as pulverized shells, since, after all, a perfectly unharmed tree might look a little out of place. These replicas were extremely detailed and looked exactly like the real trees they were designed after, right down to their broken and intact branches. The process of creating them was time-consuming and complex, and it was carried out in complete secrecy. To avoid being spotted by the enemy, troops removed the real tree and installed the camouflage version under the cover of night. Each false tree was hollow and served as a spy station. They were lined with armored tubes to protect the soldier inside. There was a seat near the top of the trunk for the occupant to perch themselves on, as well as a cleverly disguised mesh viewing hole. The soldier would observe his surroundings through a periscope or telescope and report the details to troops on the ground. 3. Razzle-dazzle. Starting in the early 20th century, the British occasionally painted their warships in a psychedelic, brightly colored type of camouflage called razzle-dazzle. It wasn't meant to hide targets, but to make them visually confusing to the enemy. In addition to featuring wild colors, razzle-dazzle consisted of contrasting lines and shapes going in various directions. This made it difficult for an enemy to figure out important details such as the type of vessel, its size, how fast it was going, and in what direction. Each razzle-dazzle ship had a unique pattern and color scheme. One featured red, gray, black, and white angular shapes. Another had more curved shapes in blue, black, and white. There was also a zebra print ship and one that was painted like a brick wall. Although the Brits can be credited with starting the razzle-dazzle trend, the Americans also used it. In 1904, the U.S. Navy launched the USS Nebraska, which had a contrasting chevron pattern on its hull and smokestacks. A dozen Navy warships were eventually covered in crazy patterns and colors. Razzle-dazzle reached its peak popularity during World War I, especially among the British Royal Navy. One newspaper reporter described the radically patterned warships as a flock of seagoing Easter eggs, while another referred to them as floating cubist paintings. Only a few of these eye-popping ships survive today. 2. A ship disguised as an island. On February 27, 1942, the Allied naval fleet was defeated by the Japanese Imperial Navy in the Battle of the Java Sea. In the days following the crushing battle, the Japanese sank 3 of the 4 remaining Dutch ships in the Java Sea. The slow-moving, 184-foot-long, 25.6 meters minesweeper Kreinsen was the last remaining ship. It was lightly armed and therefore ill-equipped for battle, and floating in plain view of any Japanese aircraft or naval vessels that might pass by. The Kreinsen's best chance of survival was to flee from Japanese-occupied waters and toward Australia, except there was no way it could outrun a Japanese vessel. To sneak past the Japanese undetected, the crew of the Kreinsen came up with the unconventional idea of disguising the vessel as an island. The area contained over 18,000 small islands, and the ship was big enough to pass off as a small island, so the idea wasn't as far-fetched as it seemed. The 45-man crew stopped the ship at a nearby island, cut down as much vegetation as possible, and covered the vessel's entire surface area with foliage. They arranged the plants in a way that mimicked jungle vegetation and painted any exposed metal in shades of gray to resemble rock formations. The ruse was surprisingly convincing, especially from a distance. Since islands don't move, however, the ship had to be careful nonetheless. During the day, it anchored close to actual islands and remained stationary. At nighttime, Kreinsen painstakingly crept toward Australian waters, finally reaching safety after 8 days, as the only Dutch vessel of its class to escape the hostile zone of the Java Sea. 1. Pink desert camouflage. During the late 1960s, the UK's Ministry of Defence contracted with the Marshals of Cambridge to outfit a fleet of 72 Land Rover Series 2A models for desert use. The vehicles were equipped with additional fuel tanks, upgraded navigation equipment, blackout lamps, search lamps, smoke grenade launchers, a general-purpose machine gun, an anti-tank weapon, flare guns, and more. Altogether, just one of the modified Land Rovers weighed over 6,600 pounds, 2,993.7 kilograms, even without doors, a windshield, and a roof. The new gadgets and gizmos were pretty impressive, but perhaps the strangest feature of the upgraded Land Rovers was their soft pink paint job. The British Army's Special Air Service, SAS, had determined that pink was the most effective camouflage color for use in the desert, so the bronze-green color scheme of the Series A2 models was replaced by a pacifying, almost pastel pink shade, earning the fleet the nickname of the Pink Panthers. They were used from 1968 until 1984. Today, just 20 of the original Pink Panthers are thought to still exist. Thanks for watching. Which one of these missions surprised you the most? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe. See you next time. Bye.